road. You don't have to, you know, sell your teeth and move into a squat in order to live life. You just have to attend to the community you're in and be aware of people around you. And I find that, you know, privilege has a way of insulating you from having to deal with that.
Joe Hill was a union organizer in the USA. He was murdered by the forces of reaction, the enemies of change there. This song deals with the needs of ordinary people then and now for a better life now and not after death.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Already.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for coming by and welcome to the Social Yet Distance podcast. We've got a great day planned today. Dr. Fran Locke from the UK is with me, my partner in crime. And then we also are blessed today to have Richard Modiano from Los Angeles. And Richard probably needs no introduction to a lot of you, but we'll talk a little bit more about that so you get your introductions either way. And we look forward to that and we appreciate you coming. So I'd like to say hello. Hello, Fran. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm very tired. We're just finalizing edits on an anthology for Culture Matters. So yeah, it's called Cry of the
Poor. That doggone communist rag, is it?
It's that doggone communist rag, yeah, and website and general publishing cooperative. And as
we're on international airwaves, in case anyone is listening. Richard, it's so nice to see you, my friend. Tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up here today.
Well, I ended up here mainly at your invitation to be part of a project that seemed worthwhile to me. And this joining of poetry, activism, and politics is a worthy endeavor.
I think so as well. And I know Fran very well, and I know her history and her involvement in movements of various sorts in the UK. And so there's some comparison to what's happening here as with that part of it, as well as the poetry and activism that goes along with that. So, I think a great place to start really, Richard, is with a little bit of your history and how you got interested in I know enough about your history, like what are the ties to Hawaii? That's the one thing that I don't know anything about. Is don't you have a history with some of the activism that happened in Hawaii when you were in school there as well?
Yes, I did well.
Now, was that early on in that part of your life?
Yeah, well, I'm of the Vietnam generation, right. And to give you my immediate background, my parents were Rooseveltian liberals, FDR New Deal liberals, which relative to today's liberals puts them far to the left of today's liberals. They came from working class backgrounds. They were largely self-educated. My father had a 7th grade education. That was the end of his formal education. My mother was a high school graduate. Right. And they were autodidacts. There's really no correlation between intelligence and formal education, which was something that I learned from my parents. So if you don't have the money to go to college, that doesn't mean that you are stupid or ignorant or uncultured. And between them, they spoke 4 languages. So anyway, I inherited this, from my familial background. I inherited this.
But you were in LA at this time?
Yes. I was born and raised in Pardon?
So the farm movement was going on during those days as well.
It happened a little bit later.
Okay.
But basically, one day toward the end of 1967, I was at the newsstand and I saw a magazine called Ramparts Magazine. And on the cover of the magazine, it showed a crucified Jesus with Asian features. And instead of 2 Roman centurions guarding the cross, there were 2 American soldiers, and the background was a rice paddy. So I picked this up and I looked at it, and it had a whole section about the Vietnam War. But more importantly, it had Dr. Benjamin Spock's article on the effects of napalm on Vietnamese children.
Mhm.
And at that time, Benjamin Spock was a solid, middle-class, mainstream authority on pediatrics. He was a
Absolutely.
pediatrician, and he had written a hugely best-selling book in the early 1950s that went through umpteen printings called Baby and Child Care.
Right.
So you had this establishment figure taking a stand against the Vietnam War. And this impressed me. I bought the magazine, I read it, and I educated myself on what the US was doing in Vietnam. And also at that time on TV, contrary to now, you could see they basically nakedly showed you atrocities.
Yeah,
There
that was
were
one of,
uncensored.
I was very young.
Very famously, there was a TV news show where a GI took a Zippo lighter and
Yep.
set a peasant's hut on fire.
Yep.
You know, they broadcast that, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's the way it is."
I used to, I remember the body counts unloading the planes every day as like part of the daily news, you know.
And also that was one thing that politicized me, and the other thing was the Watts Rebellion of 1965. I had just started high school that year, and I remember, contrary to the reactions of a lot of white people, I remember my parents' reaction. I remember my father saying, you know, well, what do you expect when the police have their boot on those people's necks all the time? So, and actually at school, one of the teachers in high school said, well, you know, if they tried to loot my house, I'd shoot them.
Exactly.
Which was, you know, 180 degrees different from what I was learning at home. So there was already this disjunction between home and school. So I was fortunate in having this broadly liberal, accepting background from which to emerge from. And when I did go to the university, I picked the University of Hawaii because I wanted to major in anthropology. And at the University of Hawaii, I became involved immediately in anti-war activities. So that's my college background. And of course, on the second moratorium day in October of 1969, because of the Longshoremen's Local, which was, I believe, communist controlled at that time. There was a guy by the name of Jack Hall, who was the president of the Local. They went out on a sympathy strike with Moratorium Day, as did a number of other left-leaning unions in Hawaii. And I remember standing in the middle of the demonstration thinking, we're only so far away from a sweeping social revolution in the United States. Of course, how wrong was I? But at that time, it was intoxicating to be with, you know, blue collar workers were supposedly pro-war, etc. Here are all these dock workers. Here are all these students. Here is the multiracial population of Hawaii, which, by the way, you know, the white part of Hawaii was a minority there. It was Asian and Pacific Islander. Those were the main racial components of Hawaii. So here was this multiracial student, white collar, blue collar group of people, a large group of people. Of course, this was only in Honolulu, but I imagined it happening everywhere. So,
yeah, it's amazing. You know, and I'm sitting here thinking, because like Fran, your experiences, I wonder how different all of that sounds when it was happening in your homeland, you know? Because, I mean, this is just, we're assholes, you know, and we go and rape and colonize and grab resources. And that wasn't exactly what you guys were fighting about.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I can identify absolutely with when Rich is talking about you're standing there and you're feeling like you're on the cusp of this grand sweeping social change, and it's going to sweep the world, that you have power, and that and it's familiar to me from some of the old folks when they talk about 1969 when the Brits reoccupied the north of Ireland, and that reoccupation grew out of social protest, a great civil rights movement over there for rights for Catholic people, working class Catholic people. And there was a beautiful moment before it all went pear-shaped, and before we were reoccupied, when everything felt possible and it felt like everything was going to change because you were mobilized together for a common cause. And there have been lots of moments like that in my own life, and you kid yourself, there is something so beautiful and something so powerful. But I think it's a very human tendency. And I deeply believe in communism, because I think we have that in us, that we can forget when we're all standing together in a crowd and we're all mobilized towards a common goal. We forget our differences and it no longer matters. And you just want to be able to share that with everybody. And you want to be able to carry that forward. I remember graffitiing in the 1990s, at the start of the 1990s, Smash the State by 98. And to me, in my youth and my naivety, that really seemed possible. And I think it's only as you get older and you suffer these endlessly rolling defeats and you watch the world change around you that no longer seems to be the case. So you sort of forced to make a difference in other ways.
Do you guys think, I'll ask both of you, but what role in this social change that we all kind of hope for, where do you see the arts fit into all that? And what, in your own journeys, did that spur anything in particular? And did it fall into place at a certain time when you may have needed it or it was appropriate? Well, what do you think, Richard?
One of the reasons that I was attracted to joining the I.W.W. because it did have a long time connection with the arts. The arts are complicated. It depends on the medium you're talking about, so that music and literature are much closer to being controlled by the working class, so to speak, than the plastic arts, which are capital intensive. Or else, if you are going to be like a professional painter, you have to rely on basically middle class and upper middle class collectors to buy your paintings. Although there are some uncompromising artists who say, well, I will work at my day job for as long as I have to, and I'll paint the kind of painting that I want to paint, whether anybody buys it or not. I'll give it away even. So, but yeah, I think that there has always been a connection between the arts and social movements and social justice movements and the working class. There's also a certain ethnic quality to this. I remember years ago in San Francisco, I went to mostly an Italian-American coffee house where they used to have amateur opera singing on Sundays. So you had these guys that were, and men and women singing arias and so forth, and they were very familiar with opera, which is perceived as being an upper bourgeois, high class medium. But nonetheless, they knew the songs and they were doing them themselves. And also, I resided in Japan for a while. And interestingly enough, the people that maintain no drama, which was a medieval drama that was originally part of the upper class entertainment, were amateurs. There was no professional no drama in Japan. It was maintained by amateurs that included both working class and middle class people. So I don't think that I don't think necessarily there is a class distinction in the arts. It belongs to everybody. It's a question of us taking it for ourselves and using it in the way that we think is meaningful.
Yeah.
I wonder, I always stress about definitions, and I've always had this definition in my head about what a true artist is. And there's some connection to like whether or not they sell their work. It's not so much that it's that they're selling it. If that's what they do for a living, they deserve it. They should deserve it anyway if that's what their goal is. But you have to jump in, feet first in the middle of capitalism to actually do that. And so I wonder if you lose that connection, and I don't know anything about it. I'm thinking out loud here more than anything, but I just wonder how much of that purity goes away once you succumb to treating the art as the goal as opposed to the activism or whatever the cause is that you're trying to support with the art?
I think it depends. It depends on what is motivating the artist.
Right.
To me, an ideal situation for an artist would be to be part of a collective, a cooperative, where you can share your art with your peers and see what they have to say about it and learn from them. I worked at the Art Students League in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And the Art Students League was formed by students and some teachers as an answer to the National Academy of Art, where you had to pay a fee, etc. And the formation of the Art Students League was everybody was going to pool their resources and hire models and hire the studio. And the teachers would be paid whatever they could be paid by however much money was collected. Of course, the league became an institution, but the idea animating it was that this was going to be formed by artists to make use of their talents for their own sake and to help each other. It was, again, seen as a collective enterprise, as a cooperative enterprise. So I think that, and clearly the arts flourish in that. I mean, it's not all down to one single individual is a genius and everybody has to acknowledge that. No.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% agree. And I think the idea of the kind of lone genius, divinely inspired artist is such a bourgeois creation. Yes. It absolutely is. And it's a way of naturalizing sort of individual specialness above collective solidarity and creativity. And it drives me absolutely round the twist. I hate it. Yeah. I hate it. Makes me so angry. But yeah, so I think, my own take on it is that you need that community, and what we're trying to do with Culture Matters is have a space where people can contribute all kinds of things, sort of essays and poetry and life writing, and they can talk about the culture to themselves, amongst themselves, without having some kind of middle class, upper class mediator telling us what is good, what good prosody is like, how we should feel about things. It's only when you find your community that you are able to sort of express yourself and you're able to honestly look at the world. Otherwise, it's always coming through somebody else's eyes. It's always going to be someone else's vision. Yeah.
Exactly.
You're probably not aware, Richard, but I laughingly and jokingly and actually offend people on a regular basis by calling myself a poetry pimp. And that's because, and you're probably well aware of this, as much as we see each other on Facebook, I spend my time sharing other people's stuff. I mean, I'll throw my own art out there, but very rarely, unless I'm in need, will you see me attach a price tag. That doesn't mean that I don't have stores out there where I'll sell that stuff. But my point is, I wrestle with the guilt of that, just the fact that the money is involved at all. So the whole idea with the podcast and the collective idea behind that is, we don't have to make money doing this. What will happen is we build this collective of artists and an audience that's intrigued by what we have to offer. And we engage in things that are, literature related and arts related. And we have discussions about things that are important, like we're having with you today. And, and what that will do is it will become organic and grow, and the people that belong there will become that community, and it will support itself. And that's what Fran and I know, and that's why we spend our time doing these things. So, I'm moving away from that guilt, because it is like anything else. It's a collective, and there are resources that are needed. And if the collective right now is me and whoever, or whatever I need to do to include other people in that fold where it's going to benefit them, then I'm doing my job, I guess, and I can call myself whatever I want. It's just, it gives a negative term to it. And that's not at all what we're doing here. She lives in the UK. She has a whole different world of people with different knowledge and experience. And writers and exposure. And, we have the same thing here. And, never the twain shall meet unless we introduce them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Fran? You got a list of questions there ready? I bet you do.
I've always got a list of questions, just generally. Why are we here? What is it for? But no, I'm very interested in the idea at the moment, because I've been having a lot of discussions with people about poetry as a form of activism. And I got into quite a contentious debate the other day with a guy who's like, well, poetry is not activism. It's just something we do, it's very nice and it helps to build communities and it fosters solidarity, but it's not activism. If poets went on strike, nobody would know or care. And I kind of like, well, that's true in a sense. But I also think that, I think cultural output is and can be a form of activism, because I think culture is the medium through which the work of ideology flows, and that's why the upper classes don't want us to have any. So I think it obviously is important, otherwise they wouldn't try to separate us from it. And I wonder, Richard, if you have any kind of like very strong feelings about the way that poetry can be used as a form of activism.
Well, as it happens, a couple of months ago, I read a graphic novel. I forget the author's name, but it was about the origins and composition and subsequent use of Shelley's The Mask of Anarchy. Mm-hmm. Right down, and I didn't know this. I didn't know that this poem was used around the time of the Triangle Shirt Company fire. This happened in 1913, I believe. And it was a group of women who were basically locked in a sweatshop when the building caught fire, and they were not able to escape because the doors were barred so that they couldn't leave their place of work. But a couple of people survived. One of the survivors was a woman who had been going to a labor college. This was, and that's a whole other subject, but there were schools that were formed for people who could not gain entree into the regular school system and who wanted to better themselves, educate themselves. And one of the poems that she read in the labor college was The Mask of Anarchy. And she used this to rally the survivors and the general public with a public reading. And eventually, this was crucial in the formation of the International Lady Garment Workers Union, which was the union that represented all of the seamstresses and what were called the needle trades in the U.S. So that showed that was a remarkable usage of a poem that was itself the response to a particular instance of ruling class oppression, and it became a communal rallying cry. I think that you can and even more common is the use of theater. Mm-hmm. And going back to the same period, there was the Patterson silk strike. The silk weavers in Patterson, New Jersey, went on strike. Again, they were mostly women. They were Italian and Eastern European, so they had limited English. And two Italian I.W.W. members went there. I forget, one of them was a poet named Arturo Giovanni, and Arturo Giovanni helped them articulate through his poetry their grievances. And he basically listened to them, wrote down what they had to say, and crafted it into a poem, which he read and submitted to the Italian language newspapers, thus alerting this whole layer of Italian Americans throughout the United States that there was this strike going on in Patterson that involved their countrywomen who were suffering horribly at the hands of the bosses. And it thereby garnered a lot of support. So you can make use of art for collective action that arises out of specific moments. And that I think is one of the uses of poetry. That's poetry as activism, because Giovanni went there with a specific intention of putting his work as a poet in the service of the working class in their strike. So you can do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's how I see at least one way of connecting. That's one way where poetry is the equivalent of activism. It's not done in isolation or something like that.
Exactly. And I always think about, in terms of using poetry in that way, I always think about the publications that came out of Greenham Common, the women's movement at Greenham Common. They published their own magazines. They wrote poems that were, you know, quite widely circulated at the time. And it was a lot of people's first point of contact with what was happening in the camps, with these wonderful kind of visceral poems about the women's experiences, because what you don't have a lot of time to do when you're at a camp is you don't have time to write a huge, great big long essay with footnotes. What you do have time to do is you have time to write a poem which just requires a pen and a piece of paper. It's portable and it's cheap and you can just scratch your rage out. So they were doing that, and it was a real source of kind of information. It was also mobilizing and recruiting people. So I think that, you know, poetry absolutely has that function. What I find now within kind of like critical discourse about poetry is there's a lot of snobbery about poetry that's written for that purpose. You know, people are like, oh, well, it's purely political, it's merely political, you know, that merely kind of creeps in there, and I can't abide that. But it's a way of kind of, you know, shoring up that kind of middle class privileged interiority by saying that anything that is also useful and has effect out in the world is not therefore great art and can never be great art, which is just absolute bollocks.
Yeah. I mean, do they say the same thing about some of the older, like established British poets and the whole, you know, history of that? Is this like a contemporary thing, or do they hate all poets, period?
I don't know. I think that if you've been around long enough, it's funny because if you've been dead for long enough, they kind of reclaim you, sort of reclaim Shelley and reclaim William Blake. So you go to an exhibition at the Tate Britain, which has all of William Blake's extremely incendiary kind of engravings and poems, but it's got massive cultural kind of like corporate sponsorship, and you're ushered around in this kind of antiseptic chamber that it costs £18 to go and see. So they reclaim it, they recuperate you inside the culture. If you're good.
All hinged on a new translation by a famous person of the day.
Exactly. And that's what they do. And I think I think that in, you know, sort of cooperatives and within working movements, poetry does keep bubbling back up, and you can't repress it. It has an energy that you can't repress, and that's why in the end we will win. That's my optimistic kind of, when I have my more optimistic moments.
And we're gonna do it with graphic novels, damn it.
Graphic novels, poetry, art, music.
You know, Richard, that does bring a question that I wanted to ask is, you know, I know you've lived in both New York and LA, and during those kind of like, I mean, those were pretty active years in the poetry world. Did you see that same? I mean, I'm familiar with the whole zine movement, and like, you know, and I know about people like Mike Kelly when he came to LA and started doing you know, music covers and all that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering, like, how much of that sprung out of a political voice versus entertainment and just a punk rock kind of screw you attitude?
Well, in Mike Kelly's case, it was a little bit of both. When he was in Detroit, which was when he was growing up, Detroit was still a powerhouse of the automobile industry. It's not the desolated Rust Belt city of today, but when he was growing up, it was it was a union town, as people used to say back then. It was a union town, and it was represented by the auto industry was represented by the United Auto Workers, which was a very powerful union and had a lot of rank and file influence at that time. So he came from that background. And I recall that when he was in LA, the Ford plant in the San Fernando Valley in Van Nuys closed at the beginning of the 1990s, throwing a lot of people out of work. And by that time, he was a high art, avant-garde artist, or was regarded as such, let's put it that way. But he turned his attention to that plant closure and to what the fate of the people working there was. so that he did a lot of his art and comic type art around that, depicting what the possible fate of those once well-paid workers would be,
Right.
showing the area deteriorating, which in fact it did. And like maybe 5 years later, in the sort of liberal, upbeat spin on the plant closure, the buildings weren't demolished; they were reconfigured as a shopping center.
Wow.
So auto workers who were, and we're talking about the 90s now, making $35-40 an hour were now rehired at $7.50 an hour. Isn't that wonderful? They're employed again, working even in the same space.
Or they have to go spend whatever meager check they might be getting somewhere else there.
Yeah, well, of course, he did an ironic. He wrote a comic strip about this that was full of irony about the decline of a once livable job, an auto worker who could live on one paycheck without putting his whole family to work, now living on a check that barely scraped by.
Right.
So, yeah, that's Mike Kelly had his foot in both worlds, and that's true of a lot of artists like that. But there are some that never have abandoned that, like Tom Morello. Raging. I mean, he's still a wobbly, and
yeah, I'm a big Tom fan, and I'd love to hear the story of how you and he got to know each other as well at some point, but not necessarily.
It was just through the I.W.W. That's all.
Yeah. He's a big fan, that's for sure.
Well, he will come out and perform for any union activity, anything that will support unions. I mean, if they're the right unions. There are some business unions that he correctly disdains.
Yeah, I don't see him at a Chamber of Commerce event.
No, you never will. You never will.
Fran, what do you think?
I'm just laughing at that image. Give me a minute, because I think you should. I think the Chamber of Commerce people are the people that need to hear that.
Well, I think once they tricked Wall Street, it wouldn't be so easy to trick them this time.
Well, along those lines, I recall a story about Paul Goodman, who in the 60s was a well-known. He was a poet and writer and essayist, and he had written a book called Growing Up Absurd, which was about the alienation felt by American youth in the 1950s. It was published in 1960. And that sort of put him on the map intellectually. And people said, oh, what's this all about? We thought that we were such a wonderful country. And he discussed things like juvenile delinquency and so forth, and the marginalization of youth of color, which was ahead of its time in a way. Mm-hmm. And he was a sort of a public intellectual, and he took anti-war positions early on. But nonetheless, his reputation as this highfalutin public intellectual got him invited to the Manufacturers Association convention to give an address. And he said, well, I'm surprised, this is summarizing it, but he said, I'm surprised that you've invited me here, but since you've invited me here, I will tell you what I think you should do. You should disband yourself and wipe yourselves off the map. We don't need you. You're part of the problem.
It's amazing. You wish that you had that opportunity. You wish that you had the opportunity. I mean, over here, they try to give you laureateships and things like that. And I think, one of the nicest moments was they tried to give one to Benjamin Zephaniah. So he's an amazing poet of color over here. He's, sort of vegan, working class, ex-addict, very, very powerful kind of socialist guy. And they wanted to recuperate him back into the establishment by giving him an OBE. Yeah. And he very publicly and very loudly declined. And I think that was just kind of like, that was a wonderful moment, because you see so many people over here who are radical, and they make all the right noises. And then the minute something is dangled in front of them, be it a laureateship or a chair at a prestigious university or an OB, they're like, oh no, Suddenly all of that out the window. And then they make these kind of weak mouth noises about, oh, well, I'm going to use my platform for good. And then you never hear from them again. That's it. They're gone. So, I mean, it's easy for me to say because I'm copying from the sidelines. Nobody's ever very likely to offer me any of those things. But you do sort of feel a little part of you dies, or then when you see one of your contemporaries using their work to kind of advertise a bank or a building society, or, sell fucking chips, you're like, I understand that everyone deserves to be compensated for their labor, and it's not making money per se, because we've got to eat, and artistic production is production like anything else. It's no different from making a fucking toaster, really. And in a lot of ways, it's what you do to earn your living. It's that you're using it to prop up the system that keeps you down. And you're exploiting your own working class heritage to do it. You're allowing them to use you like a human toupee or a human fig leaf, to kind of cover up their own kind of institutional and systemic classism or racism. And that I find unforgivable. That was a bit of a rant. You can tell I've got feelings about this.
Yeah, that happens occasionally.
It does.
When we keep you up past your bedtime.
Exactly. You get to a certain point of tiredness in the evening when you've been dealing with people or dead. You're like, I hate everything. But I was thinking, Richard, about you were saying that what kind of mobilized you in terms of being sort of like anti-war was seeing these publications and these images on television. And I've been thinking about how different it is now. That so much of this, we technically have access to all of these images. We're connected more than ever before through kind of social media and the internet. We have all of this data, but actually what we actually get to see is so filtered and so mediated and so strained through these kind of various lenses that I think that we don't have an accurate picture of what's going on in the world. And because everything is coming to us through screens and screens and screens, and it's just part of an endless rolling torrent of data, it becomes undifferentiated. You sort of click like on a picture of somebody's cute dog. Here's a photo of Syrian refugees, sad face, it, and it's kind of generated its own sort of meaninglessness. And I wonder if you kind of had, with your long kind of career as sort of an activist and writer, if you've sort of seen that happen.
I have seen that happen. I know Jerry Casale of Devo slightly, and after Abu Ghraib broke, he wrote a song called "Army Girls Gone Wild," which was about Lindy England because of the photographs of her with a prisoner who had been humiliated on the end of a dog leash and the various tortures and depredations that went on at Abu Ghraib prison. So he formed a temporary band called Jihad Jerry and the Evildoers. And he did this Army Girls Gone Wild, and he had a video of it, and it was refused by MTV. They wouldn't air it. And he did a whole album that was based around this under the rubric of Jihad Jerry and the Evildoers, and it was all about the Iraq War and Bush, and it just was not distributed. I mean, his usual distributors didn't want to handle it. No matter that he still has his reputation from being in Devo, and they just didn't want to do it. But he was able to post the music video on YouTube, and that was as far as he got. But MTV wouldn't air it. So there has been, things have tightened up in spite of, like you were just saying, Fran, we now have access to all of this media, but it's now more tightly filtered than ever.
Yeah.
Hi, it's me, Jack. The Social Yet Distance podcast is supported by the Social Yet Distance Podcast Collective. You can find us and all the information about us at socialyetdistance.com. You'll find out information about how to support us through all our social media, through the purchase of broadsides and books, and multiple levels of merchandise and art. We also have available ways to support the podcast through membership. So come by socialyetdistance.com, take a look, see how you can support us, keep us plugging in your ears while we plug the airwaves. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you. Look forward to seeing you next time.